In the year 2226, a boy by the name of Edward Sallow was born into the new California Republic in the town of the Boneyard. For the first few years of his life, things were pretty normal for an average wastelander, until his father was killed in 2228 by raiders. This forced his mother to flee their home with the young Sallow to seek the protection of the followers of the apocalypse. As unfortunate as the circumstances were, the followers provided an atmosphere for Sallow to thrive in his young life. The passive nature of the followers gave Sallow a positive and relatively stress-free life, allowing him to focus on his studies and scientific pursuits rather than day-to-day survival. His mother spent her days with the followers, helping out around their library, cooking, cleaning, and in return, they provided Sallow with access to their education, archives, and courses free of charge. In all regards, aside from the death of his father, Sallow's life provided him with every chance to become a positive influence on the wasteland, and yet, he was destined to carve his own path through the sands of the wastes. Sallow never got along with his peers or teachers due to his tendency towards confrontation and a generally off-putting narcissistic attitude. Sallow was the type of person who would rather suffer in order to achieve greater things than sit idle and live an easy life with his safety guaranteed. Jumping forward to the year of 2246, Sallow is now 20 and is assigned to an expedition to the Grand Canyon by orders of the followers of the apocalypse. Up to this point, he had been studying under the guide of the scholars of the followers and had taken a special interest in linguistic studies and anthropology. Between the chance of seeing new tribes with new cultures and new languages, Sallow was an obvious choice to accompany the expedition. Little did anyone know that this would be the most important moment of his life. Before the followers even got to the canyon, they managed to recover a random collection of preserved books. Most of these books were of no interest to Edward Sallow, but there were a few about the Roman Empire that he just couldn't pass up on. Over the next few weeks of the journey, Sallow shut himself off from the others, using any free time to obsessively study these books, learning everything he could about them until there was really just nothing left to learn. Not long after, the expedition met with a local missionary by the name of Joshua Graham, as an attempt to gather info on the local tribes before arriving in the canyon. You see, Graham was a Mormon man from New Canaan, a place not too far from the canyon, who had a long history of dealing with the tribe, making him a perfect informant for the group. Unfortunately for the expedition, they'd be captured before reaching him. Sallow, being callous by nature, believed they were being held for ransom, while the missionary Joshua Graham insists that this whole situation is due to an unfortunate mistranslation by the tribe. Before we continue here, excuse me while I go on a quick tangent and look a little more into these books that Sallow had found, studied, and obsessed over. The first of them being Julius Caesar's Commentari de Bello Gallico, a book written by and following Julius Caesar during the Gallic Wars in modern-day Western Europe. It extensively covers the Gallic campaign, which lasted 9 years, against the Celtic and Germanic tribes inhabiting the region of Gaul at the time. Sallow would use this as his, so to say, art of war, acting as the source for most of his military tactics, command structure, and cultural inspiration, as it covered military tactics, formation, and command structures that Julius Caesar himself had designed and implemented in his very own campaign. As for the second book, it was called The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon. Written in the late 18th century, it is a 6-volume book series following the decline of the Roman Empire from roughly the year 100 AD to 1500 AD, covering notable topics such as the peak of the empire, the rise of Islam in the East, beginnings of the state Roman Church, progressing all the way to the fall of the Byzantine Empire to the Ottoman armies in the 15th century. They didn't put much emphasis on the military conquests or logistics of the failing empire, but decided to focus the Roman cultural impact on Europe and the Middle East, and how it formed into what were at the time of the writings, the modern-day nations, which used the Roman political systems and cultures as a jumping point, incorporating their values, religions, and ethnicities into their own individual identities. With the depths of the writings on the Roman cultural impact, this book served as Edward's essentially never-ending pit of Roman knowledge and philosophical ideas that heavily influenced his later life. Sallow was taken captive by the Blackfoots along with the rest of the expedition. While being in the captivity of the tribe, Sallow, with his newfound wealth of military knowledge, found their situation to be disappointing, to say the least. In Sallow's words,
"They were a backward bunch, but the real problem was they didn't know how to fight."
The tribe had no grand military strategy, fighting their wars on a whim, based many of their attacks on religious omens, treating it as a rite of passage rather than a means to an end.
They played at war, raiding each other, a little rape and pillage here, a little ransoming there. I showed them total warfare.
There was no long-term societal plan or goal, meaning that there was no room for growth of a nation. This wouldn't have been an issue for the Blackfoots, considering war in this region is more of a rite of passage, never indulging into total war. This time, though, through a series of missteps, had simultaneously gone to war with 7 other nations in the area.
The Blackfoot were at war with 7 other tribes, each just as pissant as they were. But outnumbered like that, they weren't going to last long. It's one thing to be taken hostage, another to be lashed to a sinking ship. So over Calhoun's objections, I decided to take certain steps.
The Blackfoots had no one with the knowledge of how to use the weapons they had, let alone maintain and repair them. After seeing the sore excuse for an army, Sallow took it upon himself to teach these locals everything he knew, if only to keep the boat he's on above water.
I taught them how to use the guns they already had, how to strip and clean them, how to breathe when pulling a trigger, how to reload ammunition. They looked at me like I was some kind of a sorcerer. So I taught them how to make explosives and started drilling them on small unit tactics. If there's anything I learned as a follower of the apocalypse, it's that there's a lot of good information in old books.
After Sallow had trained the tribe to his satisfaction, he led the newly reformed army on their first opponent, imposing devastating losses on their enemy.
Divide et impera, divide and conquer. I led the Blackfoot against the Ridgers, their weakest enemy. When they refused to surrender, I ordered every man, woman, and child killed. When next we surrounded the Kaibabs, and they likewise refused, I took one of their envoys to the Ridgers' village and showed him the corpse piles. This was new for the tribes, you see.
After seeing the massacre that occurred, the rest of the tribes realized that there was really only one option if they wanted to live.
Kaibabs joined me, and the Fredonians after that. All the pissant tribes with names that should be forgotten.
Like I mentioned previously, the tribes had never seen war at this scale, and it terrified them to the point where they would rather give up than suffer the same fate as their former enemies. After a long year of conquering local tribes to increase his manpower, Edward Sallow officially formed his great tribe, the Legion, and crowned himself the king, changing his name to Caesar and appointing himself to the position of the same name.